Welcome to the Silver Screen Guide podcast, where we discuss films from every genre. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the podcast. Today we are discussing Halloween 20.
Wait a minute. It feels like there are that many sequels at least.
We skipped 7 through 19 and we jumped straight to 20.
Yep.
No, I'm just kidding. Today we are discussing Halloween water.
My favorite kind, Halloween water. Pumpkin spice water.
Perfect. The perfect combination.
Exactly.
No, we are discussing the oddly and silly title, Halloween H20 20 years later. This is your co-host, Corbin.
I'm Allen from Chicago, and yeah, this is an odd title.
I will never get over the fact this movie is called H20.
Yeah, like, maybe if it made sense that they used H2O in the title, then I'd buy it. But given the movie, and then given that we just watched the movie, it doesn't make any sense.
And there's only one water sequence. It's raining once, and that's it.
Yeah.
That's all the water we get.
I think I saw that the only real connection is that H2O, its chemical pH level is 7.0. That being the seventh movie in the franchise, ta-da, H2O. But that's stupid, because it doesn't connect to the movie at all, except for that it's the seventh Halloween movie. Anyways.
Right. H stands for Halloween, 20 is for 20 years later.
Yeah.
It's kind of a mess. So instead of going with Halloween 7, they kind of wanted to distance themselves from the titling that we got, started with Halloween 4, aka the entire Curse of Thorn trilogy. So you would be forgiven if you thought that this movie took place 20 years after Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers. But that is not the case. And this is where the entire timeline and canon is changed. And if you have questions about that, go ahead and look in the description below and you click on the link to hear me discuss all of the Halloween canon timelines. That way you won't be confused. You'll understand why these choices were made and which films match up with which. Anyways, so originally this was going to be Halloween 7, possibly titled The Revenge of Laurie Strode. I didn't get any sourcing from that one, but I've heard that kind of talked about across the internet. So yes, it was originally going to connect with Halloween 6. We'll talk more about that in a little bit after we mention spoilers, because in order to talk about that, I feel like we have to say some spoilers. But anyways, the creators of this film, Halloween 6, pretty much tanked, and 4 was kind of a return to the franchise. People were really excited, but it just went downhill from there. So in order to kind of get rid of the heaviness and the craziness that went on with the previous trilogy that really took it so far away from its roots, it was unrecognizable. It didn't feel like Halloween anymore. The creators decided to just completely remove 4 through 6 from canon.
Yeah, all right, let's just start over. Forget 3 through 6 ever happened. We're going to go back. Yeah, I was a bit confused going into this. I was like, well, that's stupid. Why would Laurie be alive when we're right after the events of 6? Of course, I picked up not long after that it was a retcon. We're axing 3 through 6, technically 4 through 6. And we're just kind of continuing on from now. I guess it's considered a trilogy at this point. Technically, I suppose.
Yes, to many fans I've heard over the years, this caps off what they see as kind of the perfect Halloween trilogy, which would consist of Halloween 1, Halloween 2, and then Halloween H2O 20 years later. And those are all within canon of each other, and people just like to think of those as the trilogy. And then, of course, you have your purists who only think of Halloween 1, and then some who go Halloween 1, 2, and then this one. I get into that in my discussion that you can go ahead and listen to. But honestly, I don't know of any other theatrical series that has done this. Of course, many have rebooted the series, and in a way, this is it's kind of a soft reboot, but it still ties in with previous installments. I don't know any other theatrical series that has just taken the previous 3 movies that they've made and scrubbed them from canon.
Yeah, I can't think off the top of my head that of anything else that's done that. It's simultaneously scrubbed them from canon, but also says, well, I guess if you want to believe that those happened, they don't exactly like completely rip them out, but they more or less an alternate timeline of, you know, continuing on from the franchise from what happened after 2. If you want to believe that,
Right.
I know you go into detail with this a lot more in the podcast, but yeah, this is odd. The only one I can think of is maybe Star Wars, but that one not necessarily, because it started in the middle and then went back to the beginning and then came back and did it after towards the end of episode 9 up until this point. So that's the closest comparison I can make, and that's not really even worthy of a comparison anyways.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing as well, actually, but this one is completely different, and we know that because not too far into the movie, they say Dr. Loomis, after the events of Halloween 2, spent the rest of his life trying to find Michael, and he never did.
Right.
Which we know, if you're going off the Curse of Thorn canon, which is what I call it, you'll know that's completely not true, and he did find him, and they had many confrontations and showdowns and whatnot, but according to this movie, none of that ever happened, and I've still got more to say about that here in just a bit. But before we get too far into that, this movie was released August 5th, 1998, which was nearly to the same month, 3 years after the previous movie. The previous movies were coming out, 4 and 5 came out within a year of each other, and that didn't work very well. So then between 5 and 6, it took 6 years, and this one took 3. So,
yeah. That just all kind of came from budget concerns and pre-production getting stuck in that little pit for a while, at least for 6. Yeah, Halloween's had quite the roller coaster when it comes to releasing movies. They don't exactly have a consistent schedule. It's just, okay, well, now we have money, let's do it. Or now we finally got through production, let's do it. That just seems to be the case at this point.
This movie is directed by Steve Miner, who has directed a lot of TV. He did direct the movie Warlock from 1989. Never seen it. I mean, it barely rings a bell. He also did the TV show The Wonder Years, which many of you may know. He also did Switched at Birth and Make It or Break It. Like, he directed some of the episodes, not like he did the whole thing. Yeah. And he also directed Friday the 13th Part 2 and 3.
Well, I can see at least at one point where that inspiration came from.
Sure.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It seems like everybody attached to this is kind of all over the place with the projects they've been involved with.
Yeah.
So the people that ultimately wrote the movie, Robert Zappia. Zappia's next biggest claim to fame is being on the production staff for Home Improvement. And
good.
Most recently, he did worked on the Tom and Jerry show.
Gotcha. That's interesting.
Yeah. Also, Matt Greenberg wrote the movie. He has done some slightly more significant things. He wrote Reign of Fire, which was that early 2000 movie I wasn't allowed to watch, even though I wanted to, because it had dragons and Christian Bale and Gerard Butler. It looked awesome.
Yeah.
He also did Seventh Son, which has been more recent. That one might have came to theaters, mostly direct-to-video, probably. Starred Jeff Bridges.
Yeah, I do remember hearing about that, but I never saw it.
Yeah. 1408, the Stephen King adaptation.
Oh, yeah.
Sam
haven't
Jackson.
seen that one either, but I know about it.
Yeah, it's pretty decent. So he's done some bigger things than Robert Zappia. I don't understand where Robert Zappia even came from. It's like the writer of Halloween 6. Never really written a movie before in his life, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Just a big fan of the series and felt like he could take it in the right direction. But then it was ultimately wrestled away from him and they changed so much. But it does seem like with these movies, it's just people that have really never done anything before or have no credits to give them I just don't understand how this works in Hollywood. Like the guy who wrote X-Men Origins Wolverine, He has done nothing since, pretty much. Did nothing before. We have no picture of him. Who is this person? Why did they let him a part of the X-Men franchise? I don't know.
My guess, and this probably still also relates to Halloween, is they hire a guy to put the name of the company on. So basically they direct the guy that has the name of writer or the name of director in these kinds of movies, so that it feels like they have the name, but in reality it's the studio directing the picture. They just have a name to put the face to. That's just my guess. In that sense, they're cheaper than getting like a big name director. That's the only thing I could actually think of.
Okay, so the movie stars Jamie Lee Curtis, actually. She is returning to the franchise after almost 20 years.
Yeah, nice to have her back. I mean, at this point, of course, she's gotten much bigger as an actress.
Oh, yes.
And one of the reasons why she came back was she's like, well, yeah, this is the series, this is the movie franchise that basically began my acting career. And so that was one of the reasons why she came back. Her reasons then changed later on to production. But yeah.
The movie also stars Adam Arkin. When I popped it on, I saw the name and I thought it said Alan Arkin, who is a famous veteran actor. And I had seen it about once before and I did not remember him in this. But it's not. It is his son, Adam Arkin.
Gotcha.
Also, Michelle Williams, very famous now.
I saw that in the credits. I was like, what? Coming fresh off of Manchester by the Sea.
Oh, yes. Also, this movie introduces Josh Hartnett, who kind of became a teen heartthrob around this time. I remember seeing him in The Virgin Suicides. He was Mr. Cool in that. And also, many of you may not know this, but he was offered the role of Bruce Wayne in Chris Nolan's Batman Begins.
Oh, wow. That would have been interesting.
Yes. So we nearly got a Josh Hartnett Batman trilogy without Christian Bale. But for some reason that I can't remember, Hartnett turned down the role.
That's unfortunate.
And I read this in a magazine somewhere, and he has regretted it ever since because Christian Bale is an Academy Award winning actor who has gone on to do huge things. Josh Hartnett has kind of disappeared from the spotlight for the most part. The only other thing I can think of him in is Penny Dreadful TV series. I saw him in some of that. I know he's done a couple other things, but just Batman could have been the big launch to his career. This was pretty good for him to start off with in a Halloween movie because that had a lot of recognition and cult following. But I read a quote that he was really reluctant to join this movie as his first role. He said, is that even a thing still? And is it going direct to video? And yes, there was kind of a substantiated rumor floating around. This was going to be direct to video because the previous movies were doing so bad.
Yeah, I can see why that's a concern. Like you said, the previous movies have just not been doing very good. And so for a guy who's kind of an up-and-coming actor, that would be a concern of his, I would assume. Yeah.
The movie also stars Adam Han-Bird, who many of you may know as young Alan from Jumanji.
Oh, haven't seen Jumanji, but
what?
I'll take your word for it. Yeah, I haven't seen it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I know.
Okay. Continuing, Jodie Lynn O'Keefe, LL Cool J, Nancy Stevens, Janet Leigh.
Oh, yes.
Janet Leigh
has that name.
Oh, yes. Janet Leigh, the somewhat star of Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. Mm-hmm. And for those of you who don't know, Janet Leigh is Jamie Lee Curtis's mother.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's cool that mother and daughter get to appear on screen here together. Janet Leigh was in what many consider to be the original slasher movie, although that's debatable, I guess, with Peeping Tom.
Right.
Won't get into that here. And then her daughter was kind of what launched more of the modern slashers, even though they weren't made that far apart, really. But anyways, also the part of Janet Leigh I read was originally offered to, I believe, PJ Souls, but she was just kind of very ambiguous about whether she would do it or not. So she ultimately didn't give him an answer, and they cast Janet Leigh.
Right.
So
right.
Also, this movie stars Joseph Gordon-Levitt.
Yeah, I think I saw his name in the credits as Jimmy, and I was like, what?
Mm-hmm.
Because he's a big name now. I mean, I think one of the more recent examples is Inception, and of course he's been in more stuff than that. But yeah. Interesting that Joseph Gordon, this is not his first acting role. It's one of, I think, it was before he got really big. But yeah, interesting that he shows up in this movie. This has got a lot of actors and actresses that will later become very popular, which is interesting to me.
Yes. And I did find it interesting because the previous movie introduced Paul Rudd, who went on to be fairly famous. He's got a new movie coming out this month, Ant-Man. But Joseph Gordon-Levitt, I would say, has been a much more serious actor than Paul Rudd. But those two were fairly young with these movies, and they kind of helped, launch their careers in ways.
Right. Yeah, now, Jimmy is really only here for the first few minutes. But
instead of a main character.
Yeah, he's just very much a side character here. But yeah, it's still interesting to see, like you were just saying, Joseph Gordon-Levitt and now also Paul Rudd. Just kind of interesting. These two guys are pretty big names now in cinema.
I should note that LL Cool J is not the last rapper to be in a Halloween movie.
Really?
Yep. For some reason, we are getting another rapper in the next installment that we will be reviewing. I don't know why they thought this was a good idea to put rappers in the Halloween movies, but we'll see. We'll see. Compare LL Cool J to Busta Rhymes.
That would be interesting to see next movie where they do with that, because I guess I didn't exactly know that there was an actor in this movie until later on, when I was doing research for it.
Mm-hmm. Also, this movie is produced by Kevin Williamson. Does that name ring any bells? Well, it should, because Kevin Williamson did the popular CW show Dawson's Creek. He also did Scream, the Wes Craven Scream film, and he also did I Know What You Did Last Summer, which I just saw actually a couple weeks ago for the first time, and I really enjoyed it. So Kevin Williamson was pretty hot commodity around this time, and he wrote the original treatment for this movie. We're not going to talk about it just yet, but I did want to bring it up since we were talking about the crew of this movie. Now, we can briefly talk about the composers, you could say.
Composers.
Right. So if you notice in the credits, it says the music is composed by John Ottman, but then it says additional music by Marco Beltrami. These two, I'm like, okay, I've heard of both of these people before. I can't name a thing off the top of my head that either have composed, but when I went to look it up, both of them have composed a ton of very popular movies that I've seen, mostly all of them. It's arguable that Marco Beltrami has done more, and he technically was nominated for 2 Academy Awards, including The Hurt Locker and 3:10 to Yuma. But first, John Ottman was brought on board, and he did The Usual Suspects, The Cable Guy, Apt Pupil, X2, even the new X-Men movies, Fantastic Four, the older ones, and then Marco Beltrami did Fantastic Four, the 2015 one, kind of interesting. John Ottman also did Valkyrie, Astro Boy, The Nice Guys, and his latest is he is doing the score for the new movie about Queen, Bohemian Rhapsody.
Oh, interesting.
Just all over the place.
Yeah, these are also scores that are not necessarily in high regard.
Oh, no.
They're not bad or anything, but they're just not ones that you usually would remember.
Right.
Like anything from I would even say anything from John Carpenter.
Sure.
would be a good example.
Yeah, and it should be noted that we've had Alan Hayworth. It was originally John Carpenter. Alan Hayworth came on to do the score together. John dropped out, and then it was just Alan for a while, and he's gone now. So we got John Ottman. But apparently, the studio didn't like John Ottman's score, and I remember watching a special feature on the disc where John Ottman is like, they didn't like my stuff. They came in, rewrote some things, totally changed some stuff up. One of the most prominent scenes is when Michael is walking down the hallway, and it's a upward shot, kind of an upward shot of him walking. That was completely different in the original score and original cut of the film. So I think it was Bob Weinstein came in and said, we're going to bring in Marco Beltrami. He's popular. He's done the Scream movies. So if you detected some score from Scream in this, that's because it is directly lifted from Scream.
Right. Yeah. Yes, the music, some at points is from Scream. There is a scene as well that has, I think it may have been Scream 2, if I read that right. That's playing on the TV. Scream is just kind of here and there in this movie. It's very interesting being a movie that's kind of poking fun at horror movies. And then a serious horror movie comes out and it uses these, but is actually kind of serious. I just found that funny.
I believe Dimension produced the Scream films as well.
Yes, I believe you're right.
That's why they can do this. I don't know why they would do this. I know the original Halloween showed some older horror movies on the TV, and that's kind of been a thing, is to reference other horror movies. I wouldn't reference something as popular as Scream, though.
Yeah, I mean, Scream came out, in 95, right? So that was only about 3 years before this one came out.
Right. Scream 2 just came out 8 months before this one.
Yeah. So it feels like, pretty, I would say, too recent to start referencing that movie.
Plus, it's possible you're just going to remind people of a horror movie that they love, done by Wes Craven. So
yeah. One that does become pretty much a classic. No more than, I would say, a few years later, it's been regarded as a classic, and now it is I would even consider it a classic.
Oh, absolutely. But Marco Beltrami has done Resident Evil, Blade 2, Terminator 3, Hellboy, iRobot, Triple X2, Red Eye, great Wes Craven movie people overlook, Live Free or Die Hard, 3:10 to Yuma, which got him the Oscar nomination. He also did The Hurt Locker, which also got him the Oscar nomination. He did Knowing, which I think is an underrated Alex Proyas film. Jonah Hex. I actually saw it in the theater. 100% forgot I even saw it. World War Z, Snowpiercer, the remake of Carrie. He just did Logan, and most recently he did A Quiet Place.
Interesting. Well, there isn't too much to A Quiet Place, but
yeah,
interesting. Yeah, so he's once again this is kind of normal. Composers are just kind of really all over the place,
right? Unless you're John Williams, then you only do magic.
Yeah, very rarely if you're John Williams and sometimes Hans Zimmer, they'll be, okay, well, of course they did this. You can just kind of tell, and it just kind of seems like a movie that they would do. But other than unless your name is Hans Zimmer, maybe, or especially John Williams, maybe even James Horner, but he's unfortunately dead.
Absolutely.
You would be like, oh, well, of course he's on this project. But these guys are, once again, they're not in high regard when it comes to composing film score.
I've kind of been disappointed with Hans Zimmer lately. He's just, it's just not even been a score. It's mostly just been like these soundscapes. I don't know, with Batman and Dunkirk. Anyways, yes, James Horner and John Williams, great composers.
Yes.
So I should note that this movie has a 5.7 on IMDb.
Oh dear.
Yeah. It also has a B- on CinemaScore.
Yeah, for CinemaScore, that's not good.
No, it's not. The thing that I guess should give us hope that is positive is technically Halloween H20 is in the top 5 rated Halloween movies.
Well, I don't know how much hope that gives, because if, at least from my ratings, that doesn't mean too much.
Yeah, I went ahead and listed all of them from greatest to least because I'm like, where does this sit with the rest of them?
Yeah.
And it sits right there in the middle pretty much, but it's still within the top 5. So just to run through them really fast, the first one is, of course, Halloween. 7.8, Halloween 2, the original 6.6, Halloween, the Rob Zombie remake, 6.1, Halloween 4, 5.9. So Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, is higher rated than this one.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it is. H20, 5.7, Halloween 5, 5.2, Halloween 6, 5, Halloween 2, The Rob Zombie remake, 4.9.
Oof.
Something to look forward to.
Yeah, great.
Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, which is technically not canon, but still it has a 4.7. And Halloween Resurrection, which we'll be reviewing here pretty soon. It's got a 4.1.
Next week or next month. Oh, I'm so excited.
Oh,
yeah,
the perfect
I was looking
score.
at these scores today, and I realized that we weren't jumping from here to the Rob Zombie remakes. And I found that, oh yeah, we got to go through Halloween Resurrection. Oh my word, that score is horrific. And I was like, great.
So quite a drop, though. Still,
Yeah.
5.7 is bad, but it's quite a drop to a 4.1. That's horrible.
Right.
Ooh. Okay, so this movie had a budget of $17 million. Pretty common for the previous movies, were around $15 million budget.
Yep.
The box office here domestically, it grossed $55 million, which is great because the previous 3 movies didn't do very well.
Yeah, and especially for that budget, I know we talked about this a couple podcasts ago, is that the ratio of budget to revenue is really big, which means they made a lot of money, even though it only made whatever much you said. That's still a lot of money given how much the movie cost.
Yeah, I guess the previous 3 movies were around $5 million for the budget, and at the box office they grossed around 15, so about 3 times their budget.
Right.
This movie was given 17, which was, I think, the right move.
Yeah.
So adjusting for inflation, this is actually the second highest grossing Halloween film after the very original Halloween.
Oh. Yeah, it sounds like there isn't anything that hasn't gone past the original, which I honestly find to be interesting, given that I hope that it, or think that at least 2 would surpass it. Not the case. Number 1 holds the top spot, and still to this day.
Oh yeah, it does. And I am going to make a prediction right now. The new Halloween film coming out this October will unseat the original as far as box office goes.
It's very possible. I really would. I'm going to hold my judgment until opening weekend to see what everyone thinks of it before I give a prediction, because it could go either way. For me, it could either not do very good or could do extremely well. Hopefully, given that John Carpenter's back, I'm leaning more towards it's going to do really, really well.
Opening weekend for this movie, it actually opened at number 3.
Ooh.
Opened at number 3 with $16 million. It nearly made its budget back, so that's
not bad at all.
Good, yeah.
That's actually a good opening weekend. Usually, you want to make your budget back.
Yeah. Of course, it was beat out by Saving Private Ryan.
Oh.
Which, yeah, it was in its 3rd week, but regardless, and it was still beat out by Nick Cage and Brian De Palma film Snake Eyes.
Don't think I've heard of that one. That's
nobody has. Yeah. Also, I should note that the Parent Trap remake came in at number 5. So very
was
close.
this his opening weekend?
No.
Oh, okay.
But that just shows you being number 5 with everything else going on. Yeah, it was kind of not too high of a August, except for Saving Private Ryan, of course. And all of these movies, Saving Private Ryan made about $1 million more than this movie. And Snake Eyes was maybe a couple 100,000 more. So it wasn't like it was a big beat out or anything.
Right, yeah, they was all pretty close in number anyways, it sounds like.
So as Alan mentioned, Carpenter is officially coming back for the new one, but he also nearly came back for this one.
He did.
He said he would direct, but he wanted $10 million at the least.
That's like, let me think here. That's almost half the, well, it's over half the budget.
Yes.
Yeah, he wanted to kind of be compensated for the money that he lost in the ones that came before, which, I mean, can you really blame the guy?
Well, exactly. You know what? Carpenter's coming back. You give him the $10 million.
Yeah, right. You would expect that they would do that, but I guess probably for budget constraints, they didn't do that.
Also, another interesting thing I found is if you go to YouTube, you can find deleted scenes that are not even available on the massive, supposedly Ultimate Edition box set. They were only in the FX TV version, which has yet to be released for some reason. I'm sure we'll get it in an even bigger box set after the new film is released to home video, and even probably a year after that. That's kind of the issue with some of this stuff is they will always release box sets, but they'll always hold things back.
Yeah.
So they can release new ones. Or there'll be a brand new movie that comes out, making your old box set kind of obsolete because it's not the definitive edition.
Yeah, that's just how marketing works, I guess.
Yeah, it's frustrating.
Yeah.
Did you notice while watching this movie that Michael Myers' masks look different?
I did not, but I read later that apparently it was changed during, I think, post-production and reshoots. I didn't notice it at all, though, at least when I was watching it.
I think I wouldn't have noticed it, but I had seen screen tests before with all of the different masks, and there was like 5 or 6 of them. Some of them were very close to the original. None of them have been close to the original. I'm thinking this new movie will be the one to finally bring back the original Shatner mask. Some of them looked horrible. I mean, the worst ones we've ever seen. Yeah. And I'm talking to you, Halloween 4.
Yeah.
But anyways, yeah. So there are a couple scenes. Okay, so when, well, these are not spoilers, but in the bathroom scene where the lady gets her keys taken, that's a different mask. When Michelle Williams looks out the window and Michael is peeking in through the door area, that's a different mask. And I'm pretty sure when Michael and Laurie come up to face for the first time, that's also a different mask, but they kind of cut it in such a way as you don't see it.
Right. Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily have noticed. I know at least the one when Michelle Williams looks outside, it's a pretty distant shot, so it would be kind of hard to tell. Anyways, yeah, I'm sure if I went back and watched it again, I would have been able to notice that. But for me, it was neither here or there. When I was looking at the mask and seeing if it was going to be different in different shots or not.
Well, listeners, we are about to get into spoilers, so I guess it doesn't matter if you haven't seen Halloween 6.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen Halloween 1 or 2, I guess. Then...
Really, you could just come from Halloween 1 and things would be not really have changed. There isn't really much in Halloween 2 to get you to here, so...
And this one does a decent enough job. If you are not acquainted with those films in a number of years, then you can come into this one and not feel lost, thankfully.
Yeah. Well, I would say not too lost, but yeah.
Not completely lost.
Yeah. You could probably work your way through it.
So, spoiler warning. Right now, we are about to get into all the juicy details. If you don't want this movie to be spoiled for you, go ahead and click pause right now. Go ahead and watch it. Come back and hit play, and we'll be ready to talk about it. The movie opens in Langdon, Illinois, October 30th.
Yeah. What?
You know where that is?
No, I don't. Actually, I did look up Haddonfield today. It doesn't exist. As I figured. Langdon, Illinois. I had no idea where this comes from, but I'm just confused because we usually always start in Haddonfield, and this time, no, we're in Langdon for some reason.
Yes, Langdon, Illinois. Kind of a surprise, not Haddonfield. October 30th, 1998. Marion Chambers, played by Nancy Stevens, Dr. Loomis's colleague, who we do see in Halloween 1 and 2, and his eventual caretaker, arrives home to find her front door ajar. She enlists the help of neighbor Jimmy, played by young Joseph Gordon-Levitt, to call the police. After phoning the police, he decides to check out her house. He finds her office to be ransacked, but no one else inside. Feeling it safe to go in, Marion ventures in to find the file of Laurie Strode / Carrie Tate to be left on top of her desk. She, along with Jimmy and his friend, are swiftly murdered by none other than Michael Myers. The police arrive to explain Michael was never found after the hospital fire on the night of Halloween in 1978, 20 years ago. Dr. Loomis spent his life looking for him, but never found him. During the montage opening credits sequence, we learn Laurie Strode died in a car crash while going 80 miles an hour in a 45. But a woman named Carrie Tate awakes screaming from a nightmare about Michael Myers, and that woman is none other than Laurie Strode, played by Jamie Lee Curtis, reprising her role after nearly 20 years. Jamie, who faked her death to start a new life with her son on the other side of the country. She is now headmistress of Hillcrest Academy, a private boarding school. It is October 31st, Halloween, and the school has planned a camping trip to Yosemite National Park. Carrie's son, John, played by Josh Hartnett, recently turned 17 and is feeling the increasing pressure of his mom's controlling parenting methods. Not letting him go on the Yosemite trip is the last straw for him. Luckily, his girlfriend Molly, played by Michelle Williams, can't go either, and neither do his two friends Charlie, played by Adam Han-Bird, and Sarah, played by Jodie Lynn O'Keefe, want to go on the trip. So, the four scheme a way for them all to stay behind, and have their own private romantic getaway in the basement of the school. The only problem is, Carrie realizes she is smothering her son and decides to let him go on the trip. Later, a few miles outside of the town, a woman's van is stolen by Michael, which he uses to follow Carrie from the town to the school. Meanwhile, Carrie is having a secret tryst with the school's guidance counselor, Will Brennan, played by Adam Arkin. Today, being Halloween, Carrie keeps having visions of Michael Myers stalking her around campus and around town. She decides to come clean and tell Will that night about her past. After finally telling Will the truth, she starts to worry why John hasn't called her from Yosemite. She then realizes Michael attacked her not long after she turned 17, and John has passed that marker as well. In a panic, she runs to his room to find his sleeping bag and supplies lying on his floor. Fearing the worst, she grabs her gun, runs for the door, and nearly shoots the security guard, Ronnie, played by LL Cool J. The three go searching the campus for the stragglers. Meanwhile, John and his friends have kicked off their romantic evening in the school's basement. But Michael begins to pick them off one by one, starting with Charlie, then Sarah, and then chasing John and Molly across campus until they are rescued by Carrie and Will. When at last Carrie's worst nightmare is realized as she comes face to face with her long-lost brother, Michael is alive and ready to finish the job he started 20 years ago. Carrie gets John and Molly to safety when all of a sudden Will grabs the gun from her hands, shooting what he believes to be Michael rounding the corner, but it turns out to just be Ronnie, the security guard. The two are devastated at the tragic mistake, but have no time to mourn when Michael comes out of a door behind them and stabs Will in the back, thus murdering him. Carrie grabs the kids and heads for the gate. She tells Molly to get John help since he was stabbed in the leg by Michael and call the police. Carrie locks the gate, grabs the axe, and heads back into the school, shouting Michael's name. The two face off in an intense game of cat and mouse, with Carrie coming out on top, the winner. When the police and ambulance arrive, Carrie, fearing Michael not to be dead, since she knows all too well from previous experiences, takes the axe and a cop's gun, hijacks the hospital van, and drives off in an insane fury. When Michael awakes, he grabs at Carrie, but she slams on the brakes, throwing him through the windshield. Once he gets up, she runs him over, but drives right off a cliff, which throws her safely from the vehicle. Yeah, right. And pins Michael between a tree and the van. In a surprisingly uncharacteristic display of sympathy, Michael looks bewildered, trying to take off his mask, and reaches for Laurie. The siblings touch hands, right before Laurie swings her axe, lobbing off Michael's head, finishing him for good as credits roll.
Well, I'll say this much. At least it's a lot simpler than the last one.
Oh, yes. The last one went to Insane Town, and this one was much simpler. But like I promised, I was going to explain Kevin Williamson's original treatment for this movie and how it connected to Halloween 4, 5, and 6. So like I said, originally, they didn't want to do a soft reboot. They wanted to make a direct connection to Halloween 6 and continue on the story from there. So I'm going to give you a recap of the Williamson treatment so you can see the differences and similarities. So in Williamson's treatment, the person at the beginning is not the nurse, it is in fact Rachel Loomis, who is Dr. Loomis's daughter. Now, we never got to ever see that in the movie. Also, Carrie/Laurie runs an all-girls prep school in Briarcliff, Maine, called Tyler Prep School. Laurie's son is named Mick, and he's the only boy at the school. Instead of going to Yosemite, they're preparing for an all-Halloween dance with the neighboring boys' prep school. Molly has a crush on Mick, but she's ugly and gets a classic makeover. A jerk named Sarah gives an oral report on the Haddonfield murders and recaps Halloween 4 through 6, making them canon, and Jamie, Laurie's daughter, she abandoned for some unspecified reason, which I will explain here in just a minute. Laurie confides in the English lit teacher, Jake Brannon, who confronts her about drinking, and she goes off on him. Mick pretends to be the Shape, aka Michael, and attacks Molly in the girls' locker room with the aid of Sarah as a mean prank. He also does this because he knows of Laurie's past since he found her diary 20 years ago, and he does this so she'll send him to live with his dad. The guard is an older female named Hattie. Michael infiltrates the campus in a similar fashion, but Hattie ultimately sees him, calls the police, he chases her around, stabs her in the heart, and she's done. Mick gets grounded to his room, but Sarah sneaks in and they have sex. Molly flirts with a stud guy, that's what it says, and the Shape appears. She thinks it's a joke, but the boy is murdered by the Shape. And for those of you who don't know, the Shape is Michael. Molly runs to Laurie, the phones are dead, and the gate is rigged shut. They try to find Sarah at the dance, who has a cell phone. Kids run to buses, Laurie attacked by the Shape, and Mick saves her, and they run. The police are blocked from going up the mountain to the school because a car crash blocks the tunnel, and Michael is the cause of it. So they send a helicopter up and load the helicopter with kids, but Michael murders the copter pilot, so Jake, the English teacher, tries to fly the chopper, but since he has no idea how to fly a helicopter, he crashes it into the mountain. Everyone dies, and Laurie sees it careen down the mountain.
Oh my.
Yeah. Laurie and Michael have a standoff, but Mick and Sarah see it happen and scream from the window in the building, and the Shape goes after them. The Shape attacks the kids, but Molly saves their lives. But Sarah gets murdered, so it's only Molly and Mick. And then they join up with Laurie. The three find an old school bus to take them down the mountain. Michael is on top of it. They don't know it until he jumps inside. The kids fight him off while Laurie drives. They crash into a different tunnel. Molly dies by a surprise attack, and Mick kills the Shape, but he comes back. And the Shape kills off the police who come into the tunnel one by one from a new helicopter. Laurie starts up the copter wings. Mick and the Shape fight. Mick lures Michael into the propellers and slices him in half, finishing him off for good. Now, just to finish this off, Robert Zappia took that idea, and there's an excerpt from one of the first scripts where it fleshed out the oral report that Sarah gives, which consists of a recap of Halloween 1 through 6, excluding 3, of course, and it shows flashbacks of all the movies while the oral report is given, and it visibly upsets Laurie. Sarah says the book she is reporting on says it's likely that Laurie faked her death, changed her name, and lives under a new identity. I think this is stupid because the book should contain pictures of Laurie, and the students, especially Sarah, should realize Laurie and Carrie look the same. The book claims she most likely faked her death and left her daughter Jamie up for adoption, so Michael would never know Jamie to be a Myers. But of course the same thing happened to Laurie since she was adopted by the Strodes, and Michael knew that was his sister and came after her. The scene ends with the scene ends with Sarah explaining the death of Jamie and Carrie running to the bathroom to throw up. So,
interesting. Yeah, it's kind of funny because at about one moment in this movie, I had an epiphany. And I said, you know what would make a really intense movie, although albeit very controversial, is if Michael or maybe not even Michael, just some random killer started killing off some of the school kids as the day was going on. And as time, of course, as the day progressed, people started getting a little bit paranoid, saying, okay, well, where'd this person go? Then I've come to find out it's a killer on campus. Obviously, this is very controversial, and I wouldn't have made for a very popular movie, especially that Columbine would happen very soon after this. But that sounds pretty similar to the idea that I had, albeit they did it a bit more carefully than I had envisioned in my mind. But yeah, this could have worked. The treatment could have worked, but there is still some pretty ridiculous stuff in it, like Michael getting chopped in half by the propeller blades, the kid flying the helicopter, Michael killing off the two pilots to cause this. You get the idea. Albeit an interesting treatment, not so sure if it feels very Halloween-y to me. And this one, it feels a bit more Halloween-like, but not as much as the original.
I do like the idea that you had of kids disappearing one by one. They don't know what's going on. And I think I almost would have liked the idea more if it comes out to not be Michael and it was a copycat killer. That would be interesting.
Right. Like I said, it'd be an interesting story to have, albeit very controversial due to current events.
Right. I will say I am glad we got the movie we do have now instead of Williamson's original idea, because that was a little too wild, I think. They needed to ground it more back to the original, what made the original work, with just more intimate settings, more frightful things, not crazy, over-the-top action or cliched bullying and ugly duckling scenarios or whatever. So I'm glad we did get this movie. So let's talk about it.
Yeah, let's do that.
It opens with Mr. Sandman.
Yeah, I was thinking that too, and I was immediately brought back to Back to the Future, I think is the movie I'm thinking of. Okay. And I'm just like, I know this song.
Well, Halloween 2 opens with this song as well.
That's right. Mm-hmm. Oh, I forgot about that. Okay, now I see the connection, because I was like, why are they playing Mr. Sandman?
Yeah.
I understand everything now.
I still don't know why it was ever chosen.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But regardless,
I guess he just liked it.
Yeah. Regardless, I'm really pleased with how this movie opens. It looks just like how it's like lit and shot, completely different from Halloween 6 and the previous ones. This one looks much more professional. It's bringing me a lot closer to the original. I'm very excited with how this movie opens. I'd say it's very well done, especially compared to the other ones.
Yeah, and it got a bit of a laugh out of me, too, because the first thing we see is the knife, and it comes down and stabs the pumpkin, and we're carving a pumpkin, and one of the big things, of course, is opening with a pumpkin in the title sequence. That actually made me laugh, and I was like, okay, I understand that, we're not necessarily going back to the pumpkin thing again, but that is really funny that they would begin with a mom carving the pumpkin, and her kids just going wild over it.
Yeah.
And kids are also running around in the neighborhood, and stuff like that. Yeah, I do also really enjoy this opening. I would say up until maybe a certain point, I was like, I'm really on board. I'm really enjoying where this is going, and stuff like that. Yeah, I would say that this, like you said, looks very similar to the original in terms of how it's shot, how it's lit, and things like that. I do really enjoy this opening.
Did you recognize this nurse?
I did not. Well, I figured that she was from a previous movie. but I didn't necessarily recognize her.
Yeah, I have seen the first one so much that I knew she was at least from the first one, but then I realized she was also in the second one.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
it makes sense to bring her back because in both times she was, I guess, kind of close with Loomis. They had worked together before, so it makes sense it's possible their relationship developed after that. And yeah, this is the first Halloween movie without Dr. Loomis.
Yeah, it is. He physically is dead. He technically is, considering the movies, he didn't die in the last one. But yeah, here it's just been 20 years, so he has died at this point, both physically and in the movie's sake. Yeah, no Dr. Loomis in this movie, which automatically I would even say raises the tension a little bit because he was kind of the embodiment of all good, and now is kind of moving on to Jamie Lee Curtis at this point.
I thought it was, they handled it really well with explaining what Dr. Loomis had done in the 20 years he had passed on. This woman was kind of his caretaker and nurse. It worked really well for me. I was also really surprised to see Joseph Gordon-Levitt.
Yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of his intro because this is this is the intro to his character. This is when we're given the Jason mask. Obviously it is a play on Jason, just to kind of, nudge the filmmakers and stuff like that. But yeah, random jump scare out of nowhere into this. But I can buy this one. It's Halloween Day or whatever. I can go with it. But these jump scares come back more than once, and after a while, it starts to become annoying. But yeah, is interesting to his character. He's a very interesting character. It's unfortunate that he only lasts for about 5 minutes, but I understand why, because he's not that big of an actor at this point.
Yeah, the classic 90s jump scares are here. Scream mocked them really well. This one thought, hey, that's a great idea. That's what people like.
Yeah.
And it's like, no.
Right.
I did really like Jimmy's
the joke.
No, unfortunately not. I did really like when Jimmy goes in the house and he's like, Jimmy's been suspended 5 times already this year for getting a little crazy with the stick.
Yeah.
I liked his lines.
Yeah. And now, had this movie kind of gone more towards a Scream route, which I do think would have been a pretty fun and interesting idea to do with the Halloween franchise, then I would have been like on board and be like, okay, that's funny. Here I'm just like, oh, okay. That's an odd line to say, but whatever. I mean, I'm not terribly enthused with this part of the opening, but I'm going along with it at this point. Although there is a pretty funny and also very confusing line that comes up when one of the kids, I forget exactly his name, but one of the other kid who stays behind with the nurse, he is just like, secondhand smoke kills, right? And she goes, yeah, but haven't you heard that secondhand smoke kills? And she says, yeah, but they're all dead.
Right.
This, for a couple of reasons, this line exists. The main reason being that it foreshadows that they 3 are going to die later. But it's just an odd line, just in general, to say in just passing conversation.
Yeah, the opening is fairly lighthearted, you could say, while still maintaining an atmosphere of tension, but it is much more comedic. And honestly, some of this writing feels very much more so like Kevin Williamson might have done this as well. And then the movie does change tone as after these first murders, and then it's more dark, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's part of the reason why I wasn't so completely enthused with this opening, is because it was kind of conflicting tones for a little bit until it found, okay, now we're actually getting get into that more intense, darker tone now. But yeah, at first it's hilarious, and then we start stepping into it. That middle portion is kind of muddy in my mind.
So after the first murders, and after we kind of get the exposition scene of what had been going on with Dr. Loomis and Michael Myers, and they better alert Haddonfield, which is a red herring. Thankfully, they don't go to Haddonfield. That's not where Michael's going, which is a nice change of direction, so it's not literally the same movie over and over again. I I'm pumped during this opening credits montage sequence with the music. It's kind of been rescored.
Yeah.
The guy doing the voice of Dr. Loomis, as we said, Donald Pleasance had already passed. So this guy, I think his name is Tom Kane or something. He does voices. So pretty good imitation as well. I could tell it wasn't him. But I'm pumped because I love the music. I love the montage. I'm ready. I'm excited. This is a new Halloween.
Yeah, and I'm kind of there with you. I mean, yeah, I figured that this was somebody else coming into the voice of Loomis because it didn't exactly sound like him. But, you know, the idea is getting across to me. I do really enjoy this music. I'm kind of a sucker for more orchestral kinds of music, more orchestral kinds of film score. And for the most part, this score is really good, especially here and later on down in the movie. I found it to be very enjoyable. It's unfortunate that there is no official release of this soundtrack due to the scuffle that happened with Ottoman and whatever else happened with that. There is no official score, which is unfortunate. But yeah, I really enjoyed this music, and I'm starting to get into it at this point. It's like, okay, well, we'll see where this goes. I'm pretty curious, because the last three I've not particularly enjoyed, but this feels brand new. We're getting this almost the turn of the century at this point as well. Things just kind of feel really new, but still bringing it back to its roots when they need to, and I'm enjoying this.
When did you realize it wasn't connected with Halloween 6?
I kind of figured when they brought up Laurie Strode that I was like, all right, so I take it we're not going to talk about what happened in the last few, or maybe we're actually retconning what that was said in those last movies. I kind of got that idea in this opening scene, but as the film went along, I was like, all right, so I take it we're just retconning what happened. Those last 3 through 6 never happened in this timeline.
I do gotta say, I enjoy that instead of Laurie having a daughter this time around, she now has a son.
Yeah.
And he's a 17-year-old teenager. And I think for the most part, their chemistry in the movie works fairly well. We're not given much time to really know what's going on with their relationship. They have to sum it up fairly quickly. I think for Josh Hartnett's first film, he does fine. Yeah, I think so. They could have got somebody a little better, but I think the dynamic works between an angsty teenage son and mom, especially when the son knows about the mom's past.
Yeah, and I would have liked for it to go deeper with this, because I found this to be quite interesting, but it's pretty surface level, unfortunately. Yes, they do have pretty good chemistry, how they play off each other, and there is, like, basically the first conversation that we see them have, you can kind of tell when the atmosphere changes and they go from this pretty normal conversation to, okay, the son's being hostile because he's just kind of fed up with his mom and his mom's trying to backfire. You know, the conversation I don't think leads very organically, but it gets the point across that mom is an alcoholic. She's basically suffering from some sort of PTSD from what happened, obviously, from before with Michael. This is very evident from the flashback we get. Yeah, so I enjoyed this aspect, but it's unfortunate that it's pretty surface level, because I feel like this would have made the stakes higher had they developed this and strengthened this bond more, but unfortunately they don't do that. And so later on, when the son's being attacked, I don't really feel much for really either character, because the connection is barely there, at least. But I'll give it this. They're going into more thematic territory. The mom has addictions she's an alcoholic, essentially. And because of whatever happened in the past, she's kind of messed up. I like this. And there is a portion of the movie where I'm just like, okay, well, she obviously needs help. And the counselor that she has a relationship with kind of brings this up, but that never really happens. And I enjoyed it. And unfortunately, we don't ever go deeper with that.
And there is a deleted scene where there is more time spent with Laurie, Carrie, whatever you want to call it, and her counselor boyfriend, where he goes into his own backstory, his own kind of struggles, and how they kind of have this bond over that. Right. Unfortunately, that's cut from the movie. So I think what they should have done instead was not have this whole sequence of Michael hijacking this woman's car. It's a really odd transition. It kind of detracts from where we've established ourselves with the film. So instead, they should have cut that sequence and left in the more character building sequences. It's kind of a weird sequence, I think, where the whole car gets stolen.
Yeah, it really is an odd sequence. And going back just a sec to the mother and son relationship, I kind of got, when I'm watching a movie that's pretty light and trying not to show my hand too much here, doesn't have too much to its substance, I begin to think, okay, well, how could they have done this same thing but made it a better movie? There was at one point, it was towards about the middle half of the movie, where I thought to myself, well, hey, what if it was just a drama about mom with PTSD and everything else that she has, and the son and the mom having the same relationship with the counselor? I would think that would be an interesting movie, but we never do get that. But coming back to the scene, yeah, it's an odd scene to have. I understand that at least this movie is trying to show that how Michael gets to places logically sometimes. And so I enjoyed that part of it, but at the same time, yeah, do we really need this? Because it feels so extra from the rest of the movie that it doesn't really fit.
And we're introduced to the, I guess, obligatory annoying side characters that they're friends with for some reason. Can you imagine John and Charlie really being friends, or Sarah being into Charlie?
Yeah, not necessarily. This is kind of a movie where they bring up characters that feel as if they should have more to them, but then don't do anything with it. And so, possibly if they had explored this, maybe it would have made more sense, but we don't really, so that's unfortunate.
And this movie does have a number of characters also. We learn Janet Leigh is Laurie's secretary, and she's also her mom in real life. And
interesting.
For some reason she says Sheriff Brackett's line later on from the first Halloween, where she said, it's Halloween, everyone's entitled to one good scare. It's those kind of callbacks that I think are kind of annoying, because we don't need a remake per se of the first Halloween.
Right.
And don't do things that just don't make any sense. I'm okay with more so visual callbacks as long as they're not too on the nose. And this movie, I feel, doesn't do too many of those. It does a couple, but not too much.
Yeah, the callbacks, dialogue-wise, didn't bother me too much, although I can totally see where you're coming from. I did like the line of everyone's entitled to one good scare, although it probably should have been said in a different way or in a different context. Maybe that's just kind of my thing in general. There are some that work and some that don't, maybe in some different context, but still in the same movie, it would have worked better. That they are neither here or there for me. They're not too much of an issue, but I can totally see why they would be. Maybe more visual callbacks would have helped with some of this.
And I do feel like the first half of the movie is pretty much just introducing characters, so we can have them established for the second half, which is kind of the big showdown, which all goes down fairly quickly. But we're introduced to LL Cool J's character, and I don't know, do you think he's funny? Do you think he's just kind of stupid and pointless in this movie? It's just, I don't know.
Well, this kind of comes into one of my biggest issue. Well, not really my biggest issue, but an issue that I have that is pretty big. All of the men in this movie are kind of made out to be sex addicts, I suppose.
Yeah, that's true.
Because LL Cool J, every time we cut back to him, almost every time, he's talking to his wife and he's reading her some sexual poem. The counselor is always wanting to make out with Jamie Lee Curtis, and at one point when she's trying to be serious with him, he says, "Oh, take your clothes off," Look, at one point he says, and actually I think more than once, he says, "Oh yeah, let's have an orgy." It's just like, why? There are no male characters. Oh yeah, then Michael, I guess, is considered male, but he is a killer, of course. So there really isn't no male in this movie that is, I would even say, uplifting for the most part. Maybe LL Cool J is the most tame example of all these. But this is the kind of vibe I begin to get about about 30 minutes, I was like, oh, all right. I see what the male characters are being touted as. I don't know if that was the intention, but that's exactly what came out.
That's a really good point. All the men are essentially perverts with only one thing on the mind. Women are just kind of objectified in their minds, but it is women who kind of are the powerful ones,
right,
in this movie that do a lot of good, and the men try to do good, but they just can't. Yes, John's friend Charlie is extremely annoying. Oh, and he's a complete pervert. It's just ridiculous how perverted he is. But all that being said, this is so far actually the most clean Halloween movie we've got.
That is true. There is no nudity in this one, which I actually found to be quite interesting that they didn't go down that route. Yeah, I mean, I guess in terms of cleanness, maybe 2 if you're watching the TV cut. That one's pretty much fine. Other than that, yeah, this one I would agree with you. This is pretty much the cleanest one.
Also, I gotta say, John's haircut is horrible, and it's like a nasty anime haircut.
Poor guy. The hair is not really suiting him. That's unfortunate. I mean, if they're going for realism, then I'm buying it. But there probably could have been a better haircut. Just saying.
And he wears like a choker necklace?
Yeah, I saw that in a couple of shots. That's kind of weird.
I don't get it.
Once again, I feel like there are a lot of interesting characters here, but we're never given the time to ever explore them. Which is, like I said, it's unfortunate.
This is the shortest Halloween movie we've ever got.
Yeah.
It's, without credits, it's about an hour and 21 minutes.
Yeah, that's like Ghost in the Shell length, like the original. Yeah. That's really short. And to be fair, Michael doesn't exactly start really doing things until about an hour in anyways. The pacing in this isn't exactly the best, I would say.
I do really like the small California town, and the campus. I think the campus has a nice design to it, and I'd say it's utilized fairly well. So I was really pleased with this because the first movie probably has the best locations, and then from there we've just had a lack of decent locations. But this one, I think, has a great location and is utilized fairly well. Yeah,
and this is pretty much a callback to number 2, where that one basically takes place completely in the hospital. This one's the same way. When it all comes down to it, it basically takes place all on the campus. And I like how we never really get a map or get to really see how every room in this place connects, because that makes it really, I would say, it makes it kind of claustrophobic, paranoid when it comes to those ending scenes, because you don't know what's around the corner as a viewer. So it kind of makes it really some interesting tension that they build out of just not knowing where we're at in the building. And I like that portion, and I like the design of the campus. It looks really like out in the middle of nowhere, and that kind of once again raises the tension when this all kind of starts going down.
So I know that we've already mentioned the score before, but getting into the score, I really enjoyed it for the most part. Yes, some of it is pretty much directly lifted from Scream. Some of it's a bit from Psycho. Not much of it, just really only one scene. But for the most part, I really enjoyed this score.
Yeah.
Not as good as John Carpenter's original, though.
Yeah, of course. Nothing's ever as good. And I do like that they took the theme and they made it more orchestral, and then they also started doing some new things with it, although I wouldn't say they're technically too new, because they're also kind of callbacks, maybe unintentionally, from the last few. But yeah, it feels like there was some real work put into it, which is unfortunate that some of it was also replaced with stuff from Scream for all intents and purposes. But yeah, I really would say anything that is an original piece sounds really good. Anything that is not an original piece, and you can tell when it's there, and I kind of figured before I did research that was what happened. It doesn't sound good. It doesn't exactly fit, which is sad, because I would have loved to hear what the original score was for these moments, when, like, especially the chase scenes, is when they more or less swapped it out. But the big studio said, no, I don't like that.
Yeah, during that scene, and maybe, I guess, more towards the end, I think the score could have been a little better.
Yeah.
But I do feel like there's kind of a bit of a plot hole, and that has to do with John going on the Yosemite trip. I can't imagine, because it's really hard for Carrie to give her son to go on the trip.
Right.
But she doesn't. I mean, I could understand maybe her not physically going down to the bus to see him off, but maybe looking at him from a window. But no, she just assumes he goes on there. And I guess she has no reason to assume he wouldn't, since he wanted to really bad. But knowing how overprotective her nature is, it just seems surprising she wouldn't safely see him off.
Right. Right. And to add on to that, we see John with like his sleeping bag and stuff at one point. And then when Jamie Lee Curtis goes home, of course, the paranoia comes back to her and she runs upstairs and finds his stuff in his room, in his closet. So does that mean that he went home, dropped off his stuff, and then came back?
Yeah.
Just to kind of add on to that.
There's some continuity issues there.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this Michael for a little bit, because we have had in every sequel a new person playing Michael. Now, you might think that's not a big deal because all it takes is a mask and the exact same costume, but no one has ever moved the way Nick Castle has from the original.
Right.
So slow, so robotic. It was incredible how menacing his movements were. And I don't think anybody ever got that, except possibly the guy in Halloween 2 did a fairly decent job. But I got a real issue with how this Michael acts and moves, because his movements are just so all over the place. It's just... And I understand they're really trying to get some of these visual callbacks where Michael will be behind them, or he'll be in the window, and then he'll be gone. But we see him move a lot of times, and that just takes away from that macabre atmosphere that he's kind of omnipresent in a way, and you'll never know where the shape will be. I don't like how he stoops. He just always stoops. And the other thing I really am disappointed with is you can see his eyes so much.
Yeah,
I hate that.
We're kind of getting back into the humanizing of Michael from Halloween 2. I think it works a little bit better here than it does in 2, because here, at least at the very end, it kind of makes a little bit of sense. But yeah, I do kind of agree with you. He feels just unnatural, especially as a Michael character. And the original one, which is, as we've kind of agreed on, the best depiction of Michael that we've had, he has this very menacing look to him, very menacing movement to him. And we don't ever get shots of Michael like being in the very foreground and our main characters in the distance, and we hear him breathing. We never really get much, if any, of that, which is kind of what built character for Michael to be very menacing and more or less a stalker of sorts. We never really get that. And I'll say this, I think he's one of the better Michaels when you compare them to the last three, but even going down to the mask, he just kind of feels unnatural, because this mask, especially at times when the lighting is the mask looks like they pulled it straight from Halloween 4, which in my mind is one of the worst looking masks.
There are some times where I think the mask does look great and it looks close to the original, but that's not all the time. This movie is very inconsistent with Michael's mask and how it shows him. Sometimes you just see his eyes really big and plain as day. Yeah. Sometimes they are hidden in shadow. Sometimes the mask looks without shape. Sometimes it does have features. I will agree with you, this is probably the best Michael since the original, but it's just those nuances that made him so great in the original that I feel like we've never had since. Nick Castle is actually coming back to portray him in the new movie, so I'm pumped.
I am very pumped, yeah, but I do agree. This Michael, he just feels a bit unnatural, which I know is kind of the point, but unnatural for the sake of a depiction of Michael Myers.
So I think the dialogue in this movie for the most part works. I think it's kind of a representation of the 90s. I do see it trying to be like Scream in certain ways. it's funny, but then there's also some weird lines that I guess I wouldn't get unless, well, I was alive when this movie came out, but I wasn't old enough to understand what they're saying.
Right.
Like, you are so Renaissance. Yeah. And I thought it was funny when the guidance counselor's like, oh, I can't join you. I'm having my nipples pierced. Like, I thought that was funny.
Yeah. There is kind of some odd dialogue in this movie, just kind of here and there every once in a while. There's just some weird stuff. Yeah, the counselor, I like his character, but I think he has some of the weirdest lines. Like you were just saying, I'm going to go get my nipples pierced, which, I mean, it's kind of funny that he's kind of, messing along with the kids as they mess with him. Right. But then later he says the lines, oh, I won't take your clothes off, right in the middle of just kind of not really paying attention to what she's saying. There's some odd stuff here. And I think he's probably, in my mind, one of the bigger causes of this.
Oh, yes. I would agree with you. I also do want to mention that I think this movie has done the best job of hitting home with the brother-sister relationship of Michael and Laurie. It was discovered in the second one. Laurie was barely in it. We really didn't have much time for it, even though they kind of tried to do something with it. But this one actually kind of had some emotional resonance with me when she is kind of pouring out her backstory, and she says she's hoping her brother won't find her. I think just thinking of it like that, instead of being like, oh, it's just this man that's stalking him, it's actually her brother that wants to murder the rest of his family, and she's just in constant fear of her brother showing back up. To me, that kind of like shows how it is messed up.
Yeah, definitely. I do like this aspect that I'm glad that it wasn't just a one-off for number 2. It's actually a plot point we're going to bring back, and we're going to start implementing and start playing off of that. I do enjoy that they decided to go down that route, and I think that is a really smart choice. This stuff is pretty, it once again just kind of adds to this movie being quite unsettling in that aspect, because brother and sister are not necessarily supposed to be like this, and the whole movie is just kind of bloated with this kind of reality, and that's just how it's always been. But yeah, I do agree. This is very, like taboo and so out there that it's part of the reason why it makes it as spooky as it is. I wish they would have maybe explored this a bit more, maybe even brought out their creativity side and maybe made this a bit more thematic. But I understand why they didn't, because after all, this is a Halloween movie, or not necessarily going terribly deep into things just anyways.
2 other choices that I'm glad they made is they didn't recast Donald Pleasance. Rest in peace, Donald Pleasance, but it's so nice to have a Halloween movie free of Dr. Loomis, and I'm feeling that right now. The other movies felt like they couldn't even make one without him. This one just shows we don't need him anymore. Right.
Yeah, I'm glad that basically the torch, either on purpose or inadvertently, has been passed on to Laurie now. For being the face of good. I do agree. It's kind of nice to just let things go for once. Like you were saying, it felt like we could make a movie without Donald Pleasance as Dr. Loomis, when in reality, yeah, you kind of can. You could still make a movie with him, and I would even say maybe be a bit better than some of the other ones before it. So yeah, I do agree. I do like that Dr. Loomis is gone, because it kind of adds to this tension that, okay, well, who else is going to save Laurie now? She's basically on her own at this point. She doesn't really have a protector. It's up to her now. It cuts out the playing field. It shrinks it a little bit. So that way, when this ending does come up, that stakes are higher, maybe highest that they've ever been.
I also think this movie does a fairly decent job of giving an explanation of why Michael comes after them without definitively saying this is why he does it. And Laurie comes to the realization when the counselor, when Will says, how old were you when you were attacked? And she said 17. And she sees her son John has recently turned 17. And we could assume that when Michael, when he was 6 years old or whatever, killed his first sister, she was probably around that age as well.
Yeah.
So it seems that Michael goes after his family when they're on the verge of adulthood or possibly losing their sexual innocence or something, because we do see it's strongly insinuated that night John and Molly will consummate their relationship.
Right.
And Laurie was always kind of afraid of anything of the sort, but regardless, she did mention a boy that she would probably like to have a relationship with eventually. So I think that's a fairly interesting idea, one that's not really explored, but nevertheless, it's insinuated. And I like that explanation, but it's not definitive, so I'm glad for that too.
Right, yeah, there are some subtle things, and then there are some not so subtle things in this movie. The secretary kind of is one that likes to just say dialogue that is not so subtle. Yeah, unfortunately though, I would have to say that this theme, although a good theme to have, it is kind of a cliche at this point, because almost all slasher movies kind of go down this route of, the killer going after the one, basically killing everyone except for the virgin in this case, and in some cases they are about to lose their virginity, but they make it out alive for one reason or another. Although it works, it's once again kind of a cliche at this point, and that's why Scream made fun of this, is because every slasher movie did this, and we're taking things from Scream, and I would assume that the filmmakers have also seen Scream coming into this one, and we're not exactly taking anything out of it.
Also, this movie is fairly violent, I would say. It's possibly maybe one of the most brutal of the Halloween movies, just with how hard-hitting I feel all of the connections are when people are getting hit or stabbed or shot or something. I would say probably the one that actually got me the most was when Sarah is crawling out of the dumbwaiter and her leg is stuck. Yeah. The dumbwaiter falls on her leg. That got me. And that doesn't happen to me easily. So that was a nice effect.
Yeah, I do agree. That scene when the dumbwaiter breaks her leg and then you see her crawling away and you see the bone sticking out of her leg. Yeah, I was like, okay, that is pretty heavy even for a Halloween movie. I do have to say though, this violence really doesn't start happening until about the last 30-ish minutes. And being an hour and 26 minutes long, the pacing, I think I mentioned this earlier, the pacing, not necessarily is bad, but it's just like, okay, well, Michael doesn't start doing things until way late into the movie. And that's when things actually start happening. But the first few kills are all off screen, which is, at least the first two, I think, which is very unfortunate, because everything we know as Michael, he always kills in front of us for the most part. Very rarely does he ever kill off screen, and if it does that, it's mainly just used to build tension. But when we have, I think it's Charlie who dies first, and at least in the academy, it doesn't necessarily do much, but even before that, it doesn't really do much at all, except to show that Michael is on a killing spree again. I would have loved to see him maybe even come face to face with Laurie a bit sooner, maybe even halfway through, or maybe even before that, and have the rest of this movie be like be a very intense thriller from then on. But no, we kind of wait until the very, very end to do that.
Yeah, and I don't know why they decided to do that. I don't think this movie builds tension very well, whereas the first one does. I never really feel tense at any time during this movie, even when they are in the thick of it. I'm still just able to pretty much relax while watching this. I'm not too fearful for anyone's life per se, because I'm not really too invested in these characters, and that could be said for all the Halloween movies. These are all pretty much throwaway characters. We're pretty much here for Laurie. If her son did die, which the movie doesn't go there, then that probably would have been a harder hit, just from Laurie's point of view, not because we care that much about John. And I feel like some of this is kind of the comedy of errors here towards the end, with LL Cool J getting shot, and
and then coming back later.
Yeah, it comes back later, completely fine.
Yeah,
is ridiculous, and
I guess the boat just knocked him out.
Right. He had tons of blood on the floor. They thought he was dead.
Yeah.
Will gets stabbed in the back and shakes a lot.
Maybe he just hit a special nerve. Who knows? I don't know.
Well, but also Laurie hits Michael over the head, and only once, mind you. They do lots of cat and mouse, table flipping.
Why tables?
Running under the tables.
Michael's on top of the tables.
Yeah.
Yeah, that seems kind of silly.
It is. It's all fairly silly. The only time that I was excited and I got chills was when she told the kids to go. She bashes that axe out of its case. She walks up to the campus, and as soon as she yells Michael on cue, that Halloween music starts playing. And that got me excited. Unfortunately,
I will agree.
Yeah.
I will agree. I felt the exact same way. Once she screamed Michael and she had the axe and the music started playing, I was like, because it's like the new score too. And as we've kind of been praising the score here, it was really, really good. And it's like, yes, the moment has been built. Yeah. And I would even say probably when she grabs Michael and starts driving away with him, I began to not necessarily feel the same thing, but I was like, okay, I'm liking this. And then when she has that moment with Michael, I like that too. And then she eventually kills him after that. Yeah, there are moments in here that are really, really good.
Oh, I also forgot to mention she kicks Michael in the you-know-where, and his eyes get really big. I'm telling you, there are these, like, silly moments mixed in.
Yeah. Once again, we have some conflicting tones here when it really should be serious, but then we're also kind of maybe even, like I said, unintentionally. I feel like I'm saying that a lot. With these comedic things that happen when they really probably shouldn't be.
And I mean, I'm pretty sure in Scream, Neve Campbell kicks the Scream bad guy in the same place, but it works in that movie. It's not trying to play it for laughs, but I just feel in so many ways this is chasing Scream.
Yeah, I may have mentioned this before, but I'll go ahead and say it again. I've felt a Scream I've had a Scream feeling in this movie quite a bit. From beginning to end, which and there is a scene where we do see, I think Scream 2 is on screen, it's playing on TV, and that's where or maybe it's Scream 1, I can't remember. But yeah, it's kind of like, okay, there seems to be a little bit too much of Scream here, which, once again, had they made fun of themselves and been a parody of whatever came before them, it would have worked. But we're not doing that. It's meant to be a pretty serious movie, and so it kind of doesn't really work. And for me, it began taking me out because I began wondering, and then I took it out of the movie because I was wondering about the things that were in the movie. Yeah, it was just kind of a mess, in that, at least in that portion.
What did you think of the scene when Michael, like, one-handed lowers himself from the rafters?
Oh, the first thing that popped into my mind was Spider-Man.
Oh.
So yeah, I mean, it just kind of felt like something that Michael really wouldn't do, is hide up in the rafters.
Yeah.
It just didn't exactly feel like Michael Myers to me.
It doesn't. It's completely out of character. It's crazy, but I will say I think it looks awesome because the mask looks good. And it's like, whoa, he's so strong. He's just like been holding himself up there waiting, and he just slowly lowers himself, ready to strike. Yeah. I thought that looked cool, but you're right. It's completely out of character.
Yeah. Once again, had they maybe built up to this moment or done it a little bit of a different way, maybe it would have had a different impact on me. But yeah, this scene where he's just like lowering himself with one hand, although a cool thing to have as he is that strong, it just is kind of silly.
And I do think this all is too short here.
Yeah.
At the end. It's wrapped up quickly.
Yeah, once Michael is essentially put in the body bag, I was like, oh, that's it? Of course, we get a little bit more after that. But yeah, once, like you were just saying, yeah, it's a bit too short.
It is a nice surprise when Laurie knows from previous experience Michael is most likely not dead.
Right.
So she grabs the cop's gun, grabs the van, and goes for it. And I think it looks pretty good. I'm kind of getting a little bit of a Halloween 4 flashback when they're driving and Michael's on top of the truck. but it doesn't really go there. But Laurie does seem like she's willing to finish it to the death, and she goes off the cliff and pins him against the car. I think this was a good finishing scene.
Yeah, I would say it's a kind of ridiculous that Michael gets pinned with a car. That just seemed a little bit off to me, but I mean, once again, I kind of get where they're going with it. Now, the scene when it's cutting back and forth between her and then I think it's maybe her looking in the rearview mirror at Michael in the body bag, I did find that to be quite really, I think they did a really good job at building the tension there because you're expecting him to just kind of get up and start moving around and stuff, but he just isn't doing anything. At least not at first. So at first I was like, okay, that's a really good way of building tension. When is he going to start moving? Of course he eventually does. But yeah, I thought that just small detail was a very interesting way of how they build tension. But yeah, this scene, Michael getting pinned by the car is a little bit cheesy. But I mean, I get where they're going with it. They set up for Laurie to kind of have like this sentimental moment here towards the end.
Yeah, what do you think of that? I think it's really confusing how Michael wakes up and he starts like grabbing at his head like he's confused, and then he reaches out for her in a really sympathetic way, which we've never seen before. So I find this to be odd.
Yeah, it is a bit odd. I think really the reason they do this is to kind of show that there is some kind of connection. Once again, we're humanizing Michael, just like we were in, I guess, some points in the last ones, but especially 2. I think that's really the whole reason, is to show that Michael isn't necessarily all bad, maybe, or he just wants to have some kind of connection with his sister, or he just wants to, or he's trying to finish the job, so he's reaching out as much as he can because that's always the strength he has left. Yeah, it is odd. It asks a lot of questions, and I don't think they necessarily answer them, and maybe that's even the point. But yeah, I agree. It's weird at the very least.
Were you surprised she beheaded him?
At first, I was like, okay, well, she has the axe. Is she going to behead him? Because that's what I thought she was going to do at first when she first grabbed the axe way at before the beginning of this climax. But I was kind of expecting her to just lop his head off, which she does do in a couple of seconds after this. So I wasn't terribly surprised, I guess.
So were you overall satisfied with the end?
See, that's where I don't know. I feel like this once again goes back to characters not having more to them than what the movie lets out. Had there been more development, these characters been better, more well-rounded and explained, and we got this connection maybe even between Michael and Laurie Strode that was built up through this movie, saying that Michael showed up earlier. Maybe this moment would have made a bigger impact, but it kind of doesn't. It kind of feels like, and also Michael has survived so much in the past movies, and then the one thing to kill him is to lop off his head. It kind of maybe even feels like a cheat. Maybe they could have something more creative, but at the same time, you know, at least we have some kind of closure for a series that is just kind of renowned for never ending.
Right. So now you can see why many fans look at this as the end of the series. And it does seem that way. It's pretty hard to see how they could bring this movie back for a sequel when the villain is beheaded. I can understand gunshots because, well, I guess he's supernatural, but being beheaded? I mean, where do you go from there? Yeah.
Right. Once again, though, it does kind of bring into the mind of, okay, what about the spirit of Michael? Because he's kind of survived most of these things. Yeah, being shot, being buried, but then dying, but then actually not dying because of number 6. Michael's been through quite a bit and has survived every single thing that they've thrown at him. And now it takes up to Laurie to take him out, which is interesting because the whole time Michael was chasing her, trying to kill her, and then the tables have flipped in the end, and Laurie ends up killing her brother. Yeah, I'm kind of on the fence with how this all ends, to be honest.
So, Alan, what is your rating and recommendation for Halloween H20 20 years later?
Well, Halloween H2O is kind of the same way I felt about the title of this movie. It's odd and doesn't exactly completely fit, but I mean, if you really think about it, it works, I guess. This is kind of a silly movie all the way around. There are moments where things just kind of happen and they come off as silly, whether that was the intention or not. It is funny. I think that there tends to be a lot of things in here that came off one way, but they came off one way, but their intention was another way. It's a really odd movie. There's a bunch of clashing with tones, a bunch of clashing with different scenes and ideas. There's some continuity errors, of course, all over the place in this one. The men always being basically sex addicts is something I really don't enjoy because it just doesn't really do much for the plot. But at the same time, though, these characters are just kind of shallow. Just all the way around the board, they don't have much to them. And had this movie maybe been 20 minutes longer, where we could explore these characters and build these relationships, this may have been a better movie, at the very least, made a bigger impact on me. And that's kind of the biggest issue I have, is that when I walked out of this movie, it's neither here or nor there. It's fine. It's nothing really crazy. I don't think I'd call it really good, but it's still something that I had fun watching. It's unfortunate that it takes Michael 57 minutes to get into this movie, actually start doing things with these main characters. But when it's all said and done, I did end up having some fun watching it. This is probably the better one of the last four that we've gotten, but it is by no means the best one that we've gotten since the first, or I would even say the second. It's fine. If you want to have fun, it's fine. It's got the cliches you're looking for in a Halloween movie. At the same time, maybe even just with the music, it's a lot of fun just to watch. 5 out of 10. I would even give it a mild recommend. A very, very mild recommend. It's fun. It's just a fun movie to watch. But honestly, there really isn't much more to it than that.
Halloween H20 is a stupid title. But I will say it's not a stupid movie. With a pared down plot that gratefully sheds the excess fat of its three predecessors, this is a return to the iconic roots of the 1978 Halloween. Yes, I have problems with it, and I do feel like they're mostly nitpicks, but I would say this movie doesn't really do much wrong. It does a nice job of recapping the first two films while providing a new story with a satisfying conclusion. I'm giving Halloween H20 6 stars out of 10 with a mild recommend. And I will go on record as saying I think this is probably the next best Halloween movie after the original so far. I can't really say the second one is, because that second one just didn't stand alone on its own, and Laurie was barely in the movie.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. For me, 2 and 3 are just really, really close. I think for me, the only thing that makes 2 a little bit better is just the fact that it feels a bit more like the original. But not by too much. They're really, really close. Really, for me, I guess they really could go either way. There are some things I like more than 2 than I do in 3. And there's something that I like more than 3 than I do in 2. They're almost the same for me. I think 3, once again, has good potential to have more thematic ideas, and they don't really go overboard with it. They kind of just mention it, and then they just move on. And I mean, maybe if they hadn't teased that, then I would have maybe given it a higher score. Or maybe if they had explored that, I would have given it a higher score. But yeah.
And I think I should give it a little credit, because I don't think any Halloween movie has ever really had any themes in it, per se. At least this
aside from the first one, maybe. That was about it, though.
Yeah, maybe. I feel like this one at least tried to do something. It tried to bring it back to the original. I will say it gave it a good try. Yes, it can do much better. And so basically, the new one coming out is going to ignore all of these movies, including H20, but it's still very similar. Instead of 20 years later, it's 40 years later. They've not encountered each other, so it's kind of H20 Redux. In a way, gotcha. I don't know if they'll have any other connection beside that very basic plot of they're coming back together after 20 years and they're going to fight it out once and for all, supposedly. So I'm interested to see what the new one can do that this one didn't. But I probably, before I see the new one, I'll probably do a marathon of just kind of this trilogy here back to back and see what I can get from it. See if I get any new experience out of it that I haven't before, because it's been quite a while since we've reviewed 1 and 2.
Yeah, especially 1. We did that like about a year and a half ago.
Yes.
Yeah, that is, I think, a good idea though for the new one to do, is just kind of ignore basically everything and do its own thing, because that way they don't have to deal with the mess of this timeline, because it is a mess. It is the best way, I think, to both make a sequel and a reboot and just tell a classic Halloween story if that's what they end up doing.
Well, listeners, thank you for joining us on our review of Halloween H20. Make sure to stay tuned, because we will be coming back next month with our review of Halloween Resurrection. Oh, that'll be a fun one, I can guarantee it. Also, we have our review out for Jurassic World: The Fallen Kingdom. Make sure to go check that out. And we will have a spoiler-free review up on the YouTube page if you haven't seen the movie and you don't want it spoiled for you. I also saw the Mr. Rogers documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor? Go watch the review for what I have to say about that. It's really fantastic. Make sure to like our social media pages. Make sure to like and subscribe so you can always stay updated. And also, we just launched our Patreon page. That link will be in the description below. It's very cheap. It's the price of a Starbucks cup of coffee, or even a meal from Taco Bell. You get so much more. It doesn't just go down your gullet and disappear forever. You get some great content that nobody else is getting. You get bonus podcasts, commentary, our thoughts on the latest movie news, Q&A, and much more. So go ahead and head over to that Patreon, and we really appreciate it. If you like these episodes that we're doing, you love these retrospectives, and you want them to stay free, then go ahead and show your support and give us a small donation, and we'll give you some great content in return just to show our thanks. We really appreciate your listenership, and we look forward to growing Silver Screen Guide, so make sure to share it with your friends. Share the love. We love discussing movies, and we love discussing them with you. Make sure to stay tuned, and we shall catch you next time.